This is the second video lecture on Chapter 12, Retail Pricing. Be sure to have your visual organizer ready as you begin to watch this video. Retailers price products for sales promotions for many reasons. Promotional advertising lets the customer know that there will be values in the store for a limited period of time and thus generates traffic into the store. During times of the year not stimulated by any sort of holiday or weather trends, advertising can drive sales volume that might not otherwise exist. Stock-up sales in January are a very good example of this, and they work. When customers come into a store for the sale items, they're likely to buy other merchandise, especially impulse items. Some retailers take temporary markdowns to let the customer know they are well priced on those items versus the competition. Walmart and Fred Meyer were engaged in a battle about this for quite a while last year. Each week, one of them would publish an image of a price comparison of their grocery receipt versus the competitor's grocery receipt. And of course, their totals were lower than the other store's totals. These items were carefully selected by each store, and the store running that particular ad came out looking more competitive. It was kind of a grudge match, I think. Another reason for promotional pricing is to look like you have the hottest deals in town. Ads that say 60 or 70% off are good examples of this, and Kohl's is the champion at this strategy, in my opinion. Here's another piece of retail jargon for you, and a very brief history of how markdowns are captured by retailers today, and why so many crazy percent off sales can be run so easily by so many stores. Before the full capabilities of UPC technology were programmed into retailers' merchandising systems, temporary price changes required labor-intensive and error-prone marking of products and counting before and after sale quantities in order to capture the markdown dollars. Price lookup connects the price of a product with the store's POS system when that product is keyed or scanned. This allows retailers to capture the prices at which specific UPCs are sold and thus capture the markdowns. PLU can mean this price lookup process, or it can refer to the product codes most commonly found on produce and bulk grocery items. There's been a recent dramatic series of events that speak very directly to what promotional pricing means to the American consumer. Ron Johnson was hired to turn JCPenney around. Johnson started his retail career at Target, where he was a VP of marketing and was involved in creating high-profile, so-called designer lines such as Michael Graves. In 2000, he moved to Apple, where he and his team created retail environments that showcased Apple products and wowed customers with service and product display. In 2011, JCPenney hired Johnson to be CEO and gave him free rein to transform its business model. A very aggressive plan was put in place to change merchandising in the stores to a sleeker and more updated approach, and also to move to an everyday low pricing strategy. Fair and square pricing had three components: EDLP on all products, month-long values, and best prices on competitive items. There was a great deal of media coverage devoted to telling the customer about this strategy and trying to point out the irrationality of high-low promotional merchandising and the honesty of the new pricing. The customers just didn't get it, and this chart shows the resulting sales results. Johnson was fired in April of 2013, and Penny has returned to its previous promotional strategy. Sales have begun to rebound, but the jury is still out on the future of this venerable retailer. This slide makes a very good point. Walmart has earned the customer's trust as far as pricing goes, and everyone expects fairly low prices there. Are their prices lower than Costco or Winco? No, they certainly aren't. But most stores work very hard at evaluating their own value proposition, and price is only one factor in a very large equation. And promotional pricing is used by virtually every EDLP retailer to a certain extent. And many very promotional retailers have some degree of EDLP in their pricing mix. Macy's, for example, has everyday values, which it regularly excludes from extra percentage off promotions. This section of our textbook details the many different ways that retailers might misuse various pricing tactics. Regular price comparisons imply to the customer that the products are not always at the low price advertised or offered in store. The way the luggage business operates is a really good example of how complicated this can be. Virtually no luggage retailer prices its merchandise to sell at the original retail. It's priced so that the margin objectives are met when the goods are at 50% off or more. The luggage buyer I supervised at Fred Meyer was appalled at how this worked and passionately wanted to go to an EDLP pricing strategy. My boss and I were really afraid of doing this, and this was before the JCPenney debacle, so we only had our instincts to rely on. I'm sure that buyer looks back on this and thanks us for reining her in at that time. It's nice to dream of really honest pricing, but it's so hard for customers to understand, especially in a business that's run this way by so many companies. The rules we abided for our so-called regular pricing for luggage were that each style of luggage had to not be on sale for at least a week every 6 months. This rule came to us from some former Macy's buyers, and it's different than what the book explains. The Federal Trade Commission is not very ardent in pursuing these sorts of pricing violations these days, so it was probably okay to do it that way. As a retailer, I really don't like this practice, but it seemed to be necessary to be competitive. We've already covered competitive comparisons a bit. Item for item comparisons need to be apples to apples in order to be legitimate. Stating lowest prices is something that we at Fred Meyer were held to quite strictly. There are 2 store-wide promotions each year that Fred Meyer runs, Anniversary Sale and Founders Days. Buyers must provide documentation to the senior executive team that the prices in this sale are verifiably lowest of the season. As a side note, both these sales are good examples of promotional events that were created to drive traffic in down times of the year. One is right after Mother's Day and the other falls in early October, both lulls in the seasonal calendar. The abuse of a free merchandise offer is not one that I've witnessed, but a version of Murphy's Law applies here, I'm sure. If a pricing tactic can be abused, it will be abused. Stores cannot go out of business forever anymore. There are some pretty strict rules about claiming that you're going out of business these days. Bait and switch is associated with real slime balls who never intend to sell any of the product they'd advertise at a very hot price. If you fear you're going to run out of an item, then you need to state that supplies are limited. The rain check rule is just common sense, and every retailer should have a process for this in place. It's sometimes difficult to get sales associates to follow this rule as consistently as they should, because finding the form and filling it out can be very time-consuming. There are laws in some states that prevent retailers from selling certain items below cost. For instance, Utah prohibits selling milk below cost. These laws supposedly protect small retailers from predatory pricing by large companies which can afford loss leaders. All the terms on this slide refer to different legal complexities having to do with setting prices. We could spend a whole class period talking about retail price maintenance, or RPM, fair trade, the Miller-Tidings Act, the Sherman Antitrust Act, and the Robinson-Patman Act. Suffice it to say this: every retail buyer is free to negotiate the lowest prices they can from a vendor, as long as the prices negotiated have to do with real savings the vendor will realize, for instance, sales volume or logistics efficiencies, and they are not an attempt to stifle competition. I'm going to repeat that because it's really important. Every retail buyer is free to negotiate the lowest prices they can from a vendor, as long as the prices negotiated have to do with real savings from the vendor will realize, for instance, sales volume or logistics efficiencies, and they are not an attempt to stifle competition. Many companies set manufacturers' suggested retail prices, or MSRPs, for their products. Often these are products that retailers want to use as loss leaders. Related to this is the setting of minimum advertised price, or MAP pricing, also intended to control using the products as loss leaders. There are 3 questions on your visual organizer about MAP pricing. Spend a bit of time thinking about it and perhaps do a little internet research. The questions are: What happens to a highly recognizable item or category when retailers make it a loss leader? And why do vendors care so much about preventing it happening, preventing them becoming loss leaders? The second question is, which vendors do you know that set MAP prices and monitor them very carefully? And third question is, what does the website on the right offer to online retailers? It's kind of funny. The URL is on your visual organizer. In conclusion, pricing, like all of merchandise management, is a science and also an art. There are no easy shortcuts to establishing and maintaining your value equation. As a merchant, you're responsible for sales and profits, and your pricing decisions are key to attaining them. You have to think like your customer, and you need to know what your customer wants before he or she knows what they want. Pricing is a vital part of this.